Liz, welcome to Canada.
Thank you.
After a long run running the British Property Federation, time is coming up to pack it in, but you've seen so much change in the UK market. What has been happening, what is happening with UK REITs these days?
Well, the great change, of course, in the UK market over the last decade was the introduction of REITs, something which we'd campaigned for as an industry for a number of years, finally persuaded our Treasury to do the deed in 2007. Great moment to do it, of course, because the markets immediately collapsed. Now, in a funny sort of way, people said, well, that's absolutely terrible. But in practice, I think the fact that we got the REITs, it actually gave them the strength and the basis to go out and do the rights issues they needed to do in order to survive the recession. And all our REITs survived the recession, bar one, and that actually collapsed for totally different reasons, not actually to do with the global financial crisis and the recession. So the REITs came at really probably quite an opportune moment. It's a good job we'd got them in. Now, there's been a gradual recovery since those dark days of 2008, 2009, and the market is looking pretty good at the moment. We can talk later, I'm sure, about strong regional variations, but the major REITs that are doing developments in London or in other successful urban centres seem to be doing exceedingly well. Values are rising, rent levels are rising. There is concern in the market about this very, very patchy regional variation, but generally speaking, the REITs are in very, very rude health.
Are there any regulatory inadequacies remaining with the UK REIT structure, or are there opportunities to enhance the UK REIT structure that BPF might be thinking about?
Yes, well, we've been thinking since the day we got REITs about the things that we'd like to do to the regime to improve it. And indeed, at the time when we were negotiating with the Treasury, it was accepted. We didn't get everything we wanted. Indeed, the Treasury actually hadn't got time to do everything we needed to do. So we sort of put them on notice then that we would be continuing to campaign for private REITs, for residential REITs, for mortgage REITs. Now, I would have to say that on those three areas, we haven't made a great deal of progress. The UK government, the Treasury, has generally felt that the REITs were more of a finished item than perhaps we would have liked to have thought at the time. They have made some changes which have been very, very helpful in terms of getting new REITs into the market. So in particular, they've done away with the entry charge, and they've also allowed REITs to list on the secondary market, which I think was important for getting the sort of smaller REITs in and sort of providing a pipeline for REITs that might move on to the main market. So that's been good, and they've made another number of other regulatory changes. But I think there are these bigger areas that are there to play for, and I think particularly looking at ways in which REITs could support the residential market. And I've personally always felt that private REITs were an extremely good thing to have as a pipeline, again, for moving into publicly listed REITs. I frankly remain to be convinced about mortgage REITs. Our colleagues in America have a number, and they seem to do very well. There's a very mixed view, I think, in our market amongst the experts. There are those who would say that mortgage REITs are great, so it's great when the market's doing well, and a bit of a liability when the market's not doing well, which makes the Treasury extremely nervous. So I'm not seeing a great deal of movement on that for a while.
You mentioned that the UK REITs, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. They came through that global financial crisis well and growing. Are they at a stage yet where they're running out of product to buy in the UK and looking, say, in Europe or overseas? Or are they still primarily domestically focused?
The ones that already had some element of overseas have expanded that. Thinking about it, I think there's probably only one other that has actually moved into some overseas investment. So I think generally the REITs have been very happy to stay pretty much where they were, and I think they've still seen plenty of potential for expansion in the UK. What I think we're going to see more of, as hopefully the government's strategy for growth and recovery spreads across the country, is that the REITs will start finding more of the properties sort of outside London, outside the greater southeast, and outside the very successful northern cities. So they'll be moving on to the sort of secondary locations. They'll be able to find value in places like that. The REITs, of course, are also investing in Scotland, so it will be interesting to see where that goes in the light of next week's referendum.
Right, that'll be an interesting development for sure. How about overall REIT market in terms of unit prices and yield? We've heard from some other countries that their REITs are trading above net asset value, or net tangible assets is another terminology that's used. And we've heard of real yields 3% in Japan, as high as, well, they're probably 7 or 8 in some other jurisdictions. How are they in the UK?
Well, of course, this problem of discounted net asset value, it's been with the REIT market. Well, it was with the PLC, with the listed market before REITs. It dogged the REITs even after they were formed. Over the last few years, actually, we've reversed that, and they've done exceedingly well. They're trading, I think the last time I looked, and on average, they're just above net asset value. As I say, that's an average. Some are better, some are not. So on general performance and in terms of yield, they're doing extremely well, because of course values are rising and incomes are rising. I mean, ironically, the income stayed pretty good throughout the recession, or rather, rental income stayed good. And now that's beginning to take off. So all in all, the performance of the REITs, the results they've been just declaring, have been extremely favourable.
Excellent. How about receptivity to inbound capital into the UK? So we've talked briefly about the REITs and their interest in investing overseas. Is there increased competition from foreign REITs or from foreign developers, or have you pretty much got the domestic market to yourself? How has that been playing out in the UK?
Well, I think the interesting phenomenon in the UK has been the influx of foreign capital. Now, what's been also interesting is the way the REITs have very much sort of absorbed that. So what we're actually seeing is the REITs actually teaming up with some of the foreign players and actually doing developments in concert with them. So they're using the balance sheet of other players to help them do sort of major developments in the UK. Indeed, one particularly very notable one, done with your own Oxford properties. In fact, I keep seeing Oxford properties all over the place in London, right, on the hoardings of the big development sites, teaming up with local players, not always REITs. Very big development next to my own office with the Crown Estate. So Oxford, I think, are an excellent example of how the overseas investors coming into the UK, finding a partner, might be a REIT, might actually be somebody else. And this, I think, is because of the, I would say difficulty, but life's not that easy if you want to do a really big development and are looking for the debt. So actually, you find an equity partner to do it with.
That's an interesting advantage of coming to the UK. If you were addressing all the Canadian investment community and you wanted to tell them why they should look at the UK for investment, what are the attributes of coming there compared to going to somewhere else in the world?
Well, I can think of some pretty strong political ones. It depends what somewhere else in the world you're actually talking about. I'm not suggesting for a moment that Canada isn't stable. So, if they stayed at home, I'm sure they'd have a very stable environment. The UK is benefiting hugely from a stable legal regime, an extremely good sort of landlord and tenant legislative regulatory regime. Generally, the success or the growth now of the economy, and dare I say it also, the broad culture, especially in London, is what attracts a huge influx of people. They all need places to live, places to work, places to be entertained. So there seems to be an almost insatiable demand for property. It's an extremely successful asset class at the moment. Now, it's not successful everywhere. I would have to say if you went to some of our northern cities, they are still showing real signs of stress and indeed distress. Some of the canny overseas investors are starting to look beyond London to look where they think the recovery will come, because obviously they can find more value if they move into somewhere that's a lot cheaper at the moment. That's proving quite slow, but we are seeing those foreign investors moving elsewhere, and there, of course, they're looking for yield. And that's clearly what they're going to get if they can buy in at a relatively low price.
And safe and stable yield.
And a safe and stable yield, and barring the odd local riot, I guess a safe and stable place to be. Everywhere has its little bit of discontent.
And it's a place we all love to go back to and visit at any time. Liz, I wanted to thank you so much on behalf of the Canadian real estate community for coming over and telling us about what's happening with the UK REIT market.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely, and I didn't know I was going to be coming into a heat wave.